everybody, welcome back to the ADHD Women's Palooza. I'm so glad you're here. And you know what? This is a session that we have never had before on the Palooza. And as many of you know, I really try to get new faces, new information, and new topics every single year we do the Palooza. And so what we're doing now is that this is our 9th year. We started way back in 2016. I can't believe it's way, way back there. Of course, you know, we lost 3 years with COVID, although we were still doing Palooza, never mind. By the way, I'm Linda Rogley, and I co-founded the ADHD Women's Palooza and the Parents Palooza, and with Impact ADHD, which is now not happening this year, but the Couples Palooza will happen in the fall. So continue to join us for all the Paloozas, for heaven's sake. I also founded the AD Diva Network, and I work with women, as I like to call them, 40 and better, because we do get better as we get older, for heaven's sake.
100%.
Absolutely. So, well, the reason I do that is partly because after 40, many women are diagnosed with ADHD, and that's partly because of the hormone influence. At least that's what we think, even though there's no research. It's just anecdotal. It's just, this is what's happening to me. Let me just introduce you to Noelle in just a couple of minutes, because I know you're going to love her and love hearing what she has to say. A couple things. You know, you have this free for 27 hours. That gives Janine an extra 3 hours of sleep in the morning, so that we can actually give you 3 extra hours too, which is wonderful. Take this link and send it to anyone that you think might be interested. We are not here to grab you and hold on to you. What we're trying to do is spread as much accurate information as far and widely as we possibly can. And you can help do that. We want the stigma attached to ADHD to vanish, gone.
Yes.
And we also would love for you to invite anyone that you think might benefit from all of the Palooza to join us. And of course, it's not session with Noelle that you get today. There were other ones that were all distributed today. Even the meditation, even the mindfulness meditation that we had with Dr. Mark Burton is also available for you to you for 24 hours. So, and they're all part of the package that you can buy if you choose to do that, and you can own them forever. By the way, I just want to mention, not only do you get the transcripts and the audio and the video, like all that stuff, you also own it forever. Some people are saying you can own it for 3 months, or you can have it for 30 days. You can have it for 1 year. As long as the internet stays up and as long as I'm still around, you got it, baby. As long as you can remember your password. Now, at the beginning of every Palooza, we have people saying, oh, I didn't get the last year's. Where's my password? It's fine. It's ADHD, and we love you.
Of course.
Not a problem. All right. What else do I want to mention? Oh, please consider joining us on Saturday. We do have a live event, and it's been my requirement for Palooza since day one, that we have a place for women to not only learn about ADHD, but have a place to connect and be in the same room. A lot of us think that we don't know anybody else with ADHD. I beg to differ. I bet you do. However, they may not know that you have ADHD, and vice versa. But this gives us a chance in breakout rooms to talk to each other. I set up topics so that we have something to connect around. We also invite some of our experts to answer questions. So we've realized that we can only have a couple of our experts there because time goes really fast. It's from 12 to 4 on Saturday afternoon. And keep in mind that this is going to be Eastern Daylight Savings Time. So don't forget that we have that in there as well. And what else do I want to say about that? Oh, I just want to say it's probably my favorite part of the week, even though I love talking to people. I just love talking to you as well. So 4 solid hours with plenty of time for getting up and moving around and taking a break and going to pee and all that stuff. Did I say that on, oh my God, oh, well, that's all right. I can say that.
You can say it.
I can. And let me introduce you, because that's what you're here for. Let's hear from Noelle, right? Let me introduce you. I just want to say that I know she sent me her bio, and I just want to say that I met Noelle a few years ago at a conference, an ADHD conference that we were both at. And she was so generous and so helpful with my very, very long survey for ADHD women 40 and better. And she has been crunching numbers for that. So we have some really great statistics that have come out of that. And since then, I believe that we've become close friends, even though we don't see. Even though we don't see.
I consider you a good friend, for sure.
Good. So
I always look forward to our lunches at Absard.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Noelle Lynn is an ADHD and trauma specialist, which is what we're going to talk about today. She provides therapy and diagnostic services to clients at the ADHD Center of West Michigan. So she's up there in the mitten. She is pioneering EMDR, and we're going to talk about what that is if you're not
Mhm.
familiar with those initials for ADHD. She has over 5,000 sessions of EMDR for ADHD and neurodivergent clients, and that is a phenomenal track record. She loves doing it, by the way. She
I
loves
do.
it. She has expertise in the overlap of ADHD and trauma, and also complexities caused by co-occurring disorders. I like that instead of comorbid, and
Mhm.
working with neurodivergent brains for effective trauma processing and healing. And we're going to talk about the fact that ADHD women, by definition, just because they are ADHD women, may have trauma issues
Yes,
because of their ADHD. So
absolutely.
we've talked about that with Ellen Littman on previous sessions. So if you want to go back to the archives, you may be able to find some sessions about trauma and women with ADHD,
Mhm.
not EMDR. So this is the first time we pulled this all together. Um,
Yay.
she is passionate about training other mental health care workers to provide neurodivergent affirming care, and I love that phrase.
Me too.
And one of those women, and we're not going to tell you who, is one of your mentees. So we're thrilled to have you here today, and thank you so much for taking time out of
Oh,
your
I'm so glad to be here, Linda.
incredibly busy schedule. I know. So first of all, let's talk about trauma and ADHD. Let's set the
Absolutely.
stage. So
Yeah.
how do they overlap? And in particular, how do they overlap for ADHD women?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, what a lot of people don't know is there's actually been quite a bit of research in this area.
Hmm.
So there's quite a bit of good research out there. We just need to disseminate it more that
Yeah.
show that people with ADHD have a higher risk of experiencing some form of trauma in their life. The research is very clear that developmental trauma is very common, which means 0 to 18, some sort of abuse or neglect in those formative years.
Yeah.
My hypothesis on that is that, ADHD is highly heritable. And when it's
Hmm.
not diagnosed and treated, we have a lot of, just expressions of mental illness. So whether it be alcoholism, emotional dysregulation, and that can often lead to, abuse and neglect of different forms.
Hmm.
So the rates of abuse and neglect in the ADHD population are significantly higher than in the general population,
Okay.
like 2 to 3 times higher.
Wow.
So now a lot of people ask me which came first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of the ADHD or the trauma. We
Right.
understand though that ADHD is a neurobiological disability, which means we are born with it. So
Yeah.
we are born with ADHD, and the other reason that we're more likely to experience trauma is because we tend to be louder or quieter than everybody else. So
Yeah.
I was louder, right? But my sisters were quieter, right?
Oh,
So,
yeah.
the little girl who's sitting and staring out the window, right? So, but as someone who is a louder ADHD girl, people would probably think that I'm crying wolf if I had reported some kind of abuse,
I got
right?
it.
Or neglect, or if I had said somebody was hurting me, which thankfully didn't happen. But I know a lot of women who wouldn't have been believed. And on the flip side, those really quiet girls,
Mhm.
right, who don't really have their voice yet, who are really highly inattentive, maybe really forgetful. I hear people in childhood being described as airheads and flaky and ditzy, right? But a lot of times those girls are actually targeted by predators because they know they won't speak up for themselves.
Oh my goodness, that's terrible.
It
But
is.
understandable, also understandable on
But that means we need to really talk about this because the rates of significant trauma among our ADHD population at broad, as a population, but as well, especially in women, is significantly higher than average.
Okay,
So,
so let's just define what trauma is, because a lot
yes,
of people think, oh, it's because I was, accosted on the street and they robbed me at knife point. That's
that
trauma.
absolutely can be a trauma. Yes.
Exactly. But I think we're not necessarily excluding that, but let's be
No.
clear about what trauma is, because the
Yes.
things you've been talking about sound like, oh yeah, somebody called me names. So what?
Sure.
It was no big deal. But let's get
Yeah.
that
So
umbrella
there's
under.
two types of trauma. So you
Okay.
have acute, which is exactly what you mentioned. You're accosted on the street and something terrible happens to you.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people with ADHD experience acute trauma,
Mhm.
right? So we're more likely to be in car accidents. We're more likely to have unplanned pregnancies. We're more likely to get drunk or high on substances and have negative outcomes because of that. So we do have a higher likelihood of acute trauma.
Okay.
But also there's the second form of trauma, which is chronic trauma. So
Mm.
chronic trauma is the drip, drip, drip. So, statistics tell us that the average child with ADHD hears 110 negative things about themselves a day.
Oh, that breaks my
So
heart.
that would be, in my professional opinion, chronic trauma. But
Yes.
if you add on top of that name calling, so you're ditzy, you're an airhead, you can't do anything right? And not even saying that that's necessarily verbal abuse, which it might be, but it doesn't have to get to that level for it to really impact someone's psyche. Now, I think in this world today, we do throw around the word trauma very loosely, which is not necessarily a terrible thing. I think it's better to talk about than not. But trauma is really anything that happens to you that impacts your nervous system.
Oh,
So it's anything that causes you to go into what's called a sympathetic response. So that activated amygdala state. So adrenaline, cortisol increase, it could be a small amount, it could be a big amount, right? So, bullying, I had a teacher who bullied me, right? And that was really not a fun experience, but I
no.
would consider that traumatic, right?
Yeah.
And so it's okay to own your experiences as traumatic. No one else gets to define that for you. Your sibling, your parents might not have experienced something as traumatic, and you may have, and that's okay.
Got it. Okay. So I'll tell you what I tend to take little notes because
I
my
love it. Yeah.
working memory doesn't always work for me.
Notes are
Um,
great.
but one of the things that I just jotted down was overreaction, is that we
Mhm.
tend to respond from that. We've talked about amygdala hijack on some of
Yes,
my sessions before.
absolutely. Yep.
And so it gets overrun by the more
The
rational
amygdala. Yes.
response.
Right.
And instead we are just kind of out there. Or the other thing is, as you mentioned, the girls that are quiet or maybe will shut down even more.
They're fleeing internally or they're freezing internally. The other thing we have to remember is the two new understanding of amygdala response, which
Mhm.
is fib, so lying, and
Oh,
fawn, which is making people feel good about themselves.
oh
So
my
most
goodness.
women go into a freeze fawn response combination on some level. I'm unpacking this in my own therapy right now, of just like, oh, I didn't never realize that fawn was a response I have. And yeah, it absolutely is. But most women are programmed to have a fawn response. And so it doesn't look like what a lot of people think it might look like. The other thing we have to remember, Linda, is that with ADHD, if you're not well treated and medicated and cared for, your prefrontal cortex isn't activated, right?
Uh,
So the prefrontal cortex serves as a giant shield over our lives, and it
yeah,
helps us to interpret incoming information. Well, if you don't have that shield, everything's coming in as a body blow.
exactly.
Everything's coming in as this wave of stress and of trying to understand and catalog. And so without that prefrontal cortex protection, we are at much higher rates of experiencing the world in a traumatic way.
Wow, I'm so glad you said that because I've never understood, even though I have recommended to the women that I coach that because things used to come in and just, kill me kind of thing, that
Right.
I've kind of leave it, like put it out on a little plate in front of me and then
Mhm.
decide whether that's really true or not. And then if it's not, there may be a
Right.
grain of, but I can just let it go. And
Yeah,
what you described is exactly that, having no protection against
right.
the world.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yes.
and I just want to back up a minute because
Yeah.
it took me a minute to hear what you were saying about the word fawn. What she
Yes.
said was FAW,
AWN, fawn.
as in
Yes.
fawning over someone,
Right.
as in
Yes.
reacting in a nicey nice way. So
Mhm.
I want to make sure everybody's clear about that.
So I think the example I use with fawn, Fawn, is Scheherazade and the Thousand Tales. So
Oh,
there's that old story of, the woman who told every night the king said that he was going to kill her. And instead of killing her, she told him a story and it was good enough that he allowed her to live till the next night. Well, that was a fawn response.
no kidding. No kidding. Well, and a
Right?
very serious one.
Yeah, but that's a really good example of she was, standing up and being like, let me give you something that you would enjoy more, right?
Exactly. Well,
So,
it's kind of a diversion, right? It's a
yes,
diversion
exactly. It's,
from,
yeah,
okay, it's not about me. Let's just talk about you.
precisely. Yeah,
Exactly.
and let's make you comfortable,
Oh,
right? Even
exactly.
at the cost of me.
Well, and especially when they're the offending person. And I don't mean some
Yes, they
people
are.
actually do this unintentionally.
Absolutely.
They really don't mean
Mhm.
to inflict trauma or inflict
Absolutely.
pain.
Mhm.
Um, and it often will happen from people who don't understand ADHD or
Very much
neurodiverse,
so.
you know? Okay, so we've got kind of a definition of what trauma is and
Mhm.
how ADHD may interact with that. One of the things that you work with is EMDR. So now we've got
Mhm.
another definition. We got
Mhm.
another little ball of wax
Another
over
little term. Yeah.
to unpack. So tell
So
us.
EMDR is an acronym for eye movement,
Mhm.
desensitization, and reprocessing. So it's a
That is a
mouthful.
mouthful.
It is
Yes.
an absolute.
Especially
So I'll say it one more time.
the
Eye
desensitization.
movement,
I can't say it.
desensitization, and reprocessing.
Okay, cool. All right.
Okay.
So it sounds like it is going in and working with dealing with whatever's going on, and reprocessing implies that we are beginning to think about this differently or approach it.
Yes,
Okay.
precisely. Yep.
So
So the
what
eye movement part is the key difference between EMDR and talk therapy.
okay.
So EMDR is not primarily an audit, a conversational therapy. It's
Mhm.
a therapy where we do what's called bilateral stimulation. So this gets pretty nerdy, but
Okay.
basically you have two hemispheres of your brain, the right and left hemisphere. And what research and practice has shown is that what needs to happen for negative experiences to be processed is that they need to go back and forth across the hemispheres of the brain, which is actually what happens when we're in REM sleep. So
Oh,
REM sleep is rapid eye movement. So
yeah.
when you fall asleep tonight, Linda, you're gonna experience rapid eye movement, and one of the things you're gonna be processing is our conversation, right?
Interesting.
But
Yeah.
if in the middle of the conversation something horrible happened, right, it might be too big for your brain to process in REM sleep.
Okay. All right. And then
So
what happens to that
it
negative?
gets stuck, it can get stuck in your short-term memory, and that can cause PTSD.
Oh dear, that's not
So
good.
it's as though it's happening all the time. So
Mm,
something like a car accident or an assault, right? That kind of thing can get stuck, and then that's where we get PTSD symptoms from.
got it. Got it. And so
Now, you can have a trauma that's not PTSD. I want to make that really clear, and you can
I
still
just
have
want,
negative symptoms from
yeah,
it, right?
yeah,
But
right.
in terms of what we understand about the brain, is that PTSD comes from it being stuck in the short-term memory. And so
Okay.
what EMDR does is while you're still awake, still fully alert, it is not like hypnosis. It
Mhm.
allows you to process that information back and forth across the hemispheres of your brain so it can be filed correctly.
Got it.
So
Okay.
if something's not stuck in the short-term memory but still causing problems, that's
Mhm.
where we do the reprocessing you mentioned, right?
Okay.
So we go back in, we desensitize, we get the distress down, and then we reprocess with new information, basically updating the files.
Got it.
It's
Okay.
very effective.
Well, it sounds phenomenal, and it sounds like we all need to be doing it
Yeah.
I was going to say every day, but you can't do this alone, right? You need
No.
someone else with you to do it. So a
Yes.
trained therapist or someone who really understands
Yes. So the
EMDR.
thing that you can look into or do by yourself is slow tapping. So there's a great book called Tapping In, which
Hmm,
is a bunch of, really great strategies for tapping very slowly on your body in different places to help regulate your nervous system, to help you, re-regulate when you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed. So there are tapping protocols that can be done that are really wonderful that you can do on your own. There's some apps for it. But generally, we're doing slower tapping in those times
okay.
because slower tapping is going to reinforce whatever you're thinking about. Whereas when you're with a trauma therapist, you do need to only do it with a trauma therapist who's trained in EMDR. You're going to do faster processing, whether it be eye movements or tapping, and that's going to help you process the trauma you're working on.
Okay, let's talk about the eye movement piece. Just I've done
Yes.
EMDR,
Mhm,
and for me, it was
mhm.
eye movement,
Yep.
and it was following someone's finger back and
Mhm,
forth,
yep.
back
Yep.
and forth. So tell us about how, if it's going to be eyes, how do they do that? How do trauma therapists do
Yep.
that?
So there's several different ways. I can literally do it right here. So I would
Okay.
just have you look at my finger and then
Yes.
just go back and forth. So that's one option. Now I can do my whole hand. There's a couple different options there. I also have a program that I use virtually that has two dots that I just push a button and it plays, and the client watches it because my hand gets tired after 6 sessions a day.
I'll
Um,
bet.
but originally, when we're all taught EMDR, you're all taught to do it with your hand
Yes.
because then you can just do it anywhere, right? Like I could go work in Africa and do EMDR, and I can help people right away in the moment. I don't have to have my kit with me. But we
Right.
have light bars for in person. There's light bars, and then online we have these wonderful platforms that give us a bilateral eye movement.
Nice. And then you mentioned something about tapping, and
Yeah.
what I know about tapping is the emotional freedom technique where you
Mhm.
tap, tap, tap.
Yep.
Is that considered something like does
So
it
that
all?
is a tapping technique. So they're cousins, right? So we're using the same kind of process and nervous system activation. So yeah, the emotional freedom technique is a great option. It uses different pressure points in the body,
Mhm.
and you have at different speeds for different things. So yes, it's a cousin of EMDR. It's
Okay.
the same sort of understanding of what we understand is happening in the brain.
Okay.
Um, Now
But
the
you're
thing
not
is
doing
that
it, but these sessions are not like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours long. They're relatively, how long is an EMDR session? Just
So
out
generally it's about 40 minutes.
okay, got it.
Now I do intensives because when you have significant trauma, what they tell you in EMDR training is do as much EMDR as often as the client will allow you.
Yeah.
So I actually just this past Saturday did a 4 hour intensive.
Wow.
So, and the nice thing about that is that it really, really flies once you get going. Now, not everyone needs that, right? And that's not necessarily standard practice, but when somebody really has significant trauma, it can help really, really speed up the process to do longer sessions. But again, the standard session for me, I have a 50 to 55-minute session, and usually we are processing for about 40 minutes of that.
Okay. All righty. And so and the things evolve.
Yeah,
So
they
it's
do.
probably 20 years since I've done
Mhm.
EMDR.
Mhm.
What my therapist did was say, we thought of a something that was stressful.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
then we did the EMDR and
Mhm.
we actually rated it on a scale from 1
Yeah.
to 10. And then we did the EMDR. And
Mhm.
then after that, it was, okay, now rate. Now think about that same situation, rate it again. And inevitably, the stress level was much, much lower. Is that similar to what happens now?
Yeah, that's almost exactly the same.
Oh, okay.
We only have a few modifications because that's the original form that was
Yes.
designed by Francine Shapiro. Um,
Uh-huh.
and that's our understanding is when we give the brain a chance to process with the bilateral, it brings down the stress. So what you do is you bring up a memory. It could be a tiny piece of the traumatic memory. It could be the whole thing. It depends on what the client can tolerate. So we now can basically titrate the amount of trauma you're thinking about at a given time. And so when you did it previously, I bet they just were like, let's think of the stressful thing, right? Now we have a little bit more nuance in that.
Okay.
Because I've learned over time that not everyone can just jump into the big trauma. So it just depends on what the person needs. And we now have some like forms that we can do. So it's what's called a manualized protocol, which
Okay.
means that everybody is trained in the same process.
Okay.
So now what we do is there's 7 questions that we take a client through to activate them. So you're actually trying to get them into an activated state so they can process, which is what you experienced, that 0
Yeah.
to 10 scale, right?
Okay, so it seems like some of the things that I've talked to people with ADHD who don't even remember their childhood.
Right.
It's not like, okay, yeah, I can remember when Johnny was really mean to me.
No.
It was, it's those memories are suppressed.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so how do you bring those forward so that, or is it a process of eventually digging down into it? I don't know.
It's a both and. So, first of all, it's protective for trauma survivors not to remember their experiences. So, I always normalize that because a lot of times I hear people like, feeling shame around not remembering things. And I say, well, your brain is trying to keep you alive. So, why would you remember that thing? That if that thing feels like a threat to your survival, then of course you're not going to remember it, right? So what we do, and actually this is part of actually what I'm writing about in EMDR for ADHD, the manual that I'm going to put out in 2025, is with neurodivergent clients especially, we want to consider this idea of creating something I call an aggregated memory. Now, this is not part of standard EMDR process, but let me give you an example. I had a client who remembers that when she did homework with her parents, it would almost always become some sort of fight, and she would end up in a panic attack. She didn't have specific memories of it. She just knew that this was a constant battle, right? So what we did was I just went through and I said, okay, are we going to be doing homework in the kitchen or the living room? Let's pick the kitchen. Okay. Are you going to work on math, English? Let's do math. Okay. Who's the parent who's going to come in first, mom or dad? Let's do dad. Okay. So then we created a memory that wasn't actually a specific memory, but it was an aggregate of everything that usually happened.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, I understand that there are also people who have no memory, and that's okay. So generally, if there's no memory at all, we'll start with the present and or future. So, or we will fact that I was in a car accident with my family as a child, let's say that's, but I don't remember it. Okay.
Yeah.
Or that there was a lot of yelling and screaming in my home as a child, but I have no memory of it. Okay. That's okay. What comes up in your body when you think about the fact that that happened? And a lot of times there'll be some body sensation, and then we actually go with that with the eye movements or with the bilateral stimulation
Yeah.
So not everyone can tolerate eye movements, and that's okay.
Okay.
Especially our ADHD plus autistic friends. Some research shows that eye movements are not great for our ADHDers.
Of course, I can
So
make.
ADHD plus autism. So we can do tapping, we can do dancing, we can do just audio bilateral. There's all kinds of options. It's very flexible.
Yeah,
So
and
for
I've
people who don't
in
remember, oh yeah,
the audio, it goes from one ear. You'll hear a
it does. It goes back and forth. Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
just making sure
Yeah. Yeah. It should at least. If it doesn't, tell your therapist because it's supposed to.
exactly. Something.
So for people who don't remember their memories, it's really important to find a therapist who's able to be flexible with that. So someone who's not going to shame that or be like, we can't do the work. That's not true. There are ways to do the work even without specific memories. Now, sometimes memories will come up as we do the work, but even if that doesn't happen, we can still do the work.
Okay, all right. So I can understand how, well, first of all, I just want to say that when Ellen was here a couple of years ago and talked about trauma and ADHD, she said that trauma and ADHD have very significant overlap in symptoms.
They can.
But she also said that treating trauma is very different from treating ADHD.
Yes,
But
I would agree.
you're pulling them together. So
I am.
does EMDR, if you're, well, let's just say EMDR period, but I'm not going to attach the
Just
trauma.
EMDR. Yep. Mhm.
But EMDR, does that actually help ADHD as well?
That's what I'm pioneering. Yeah.
Yay!
So I'm writing a manual for EMDR therapists that's
Uh-huh.
called EMDR for ADHD, and it has two parts. The first part is just how do you make small adjustments using EMDR for traditional trauma processing with clients who have an ADHD diagnosis.
Right, got it.
Right. So just to make sure that they can still get access to good trauma treatment, good care, just slight adjustments, some insights for the therapist, so they're able to be neurodivergent affirming, right? We don't want to shame our clients. This is a big problem in therapy, right? Is a lot of therapists who don't understand neurodivergence end up shaming their clients. So
let's stop there for a minute because I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone say that before.
Oh, it's a big problem.
Is it?
Yeah, and it's starting to be more talked about in the zeitgeist, which I'm glad. It's a huge problem.
I'm glad that it may be talked about in your circles, but I don't know that it's gotten out of your circles very much.
Well, let's get it out of our circles because yes. So, and I actually saw a TikTok the other day where the therapist actually used the word harm, that we're doing harm to ADHD and autistic clients. And I would agree with her.
Wow.
Well, let me give an example here. So traditional CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, works in the prefrontal cortex, which again, without holistic ADHD treatment, we don't have consistent access to. And so CBT says, let's say, thought testing or mindfulness. So thought testing is, okay, you have a thought and then you do some Socratic questioning, you ask questions of it. Someone with ADHD is not going to be able to track that process. Their brain is like a train station instead of a train track, right? So they're going to keep coming back to session with their therapist and saying, did you do your homework? No. And then they might be labeled as resistant. Right? And then they're going to be like, well, why didn't you? And well, it was really hard and I couldn't really figure it out. Well, I explained it to you. Why didn't you just do it? Their brain literally can't.
Exactly.
Right. And same with mindfulness. I remember when one of my therapists, thankfully she didn't shame me, but she was like, Noelle, I want you to practice mindfulness while you brush your teeth. And what she meant by it was just noticing, being in the present, but I couldn't. I tried really hard, but I could not before treatment be mindful. I can now, but that's with a lot of practice and a lot of treatment, and support, right? So thankfully she didn't get mad at me for that, but I could see a lot of therapists who take on that kind of parent or teacher role where they're like, well, this is supposed to help you. You're supposed to do this. Why aren't you doing it? And then they get labeled resistant, and then they're given all these tools and skills that are not designed for their brains. And with DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. There are a few aspects of DBT I like, but the big assumption in DBT is that someone has cognitive control at times of distress. Which is a massive assumption. Well, how am I going to use my dear man? Well, and we don't. How am I going to use my dear man acronym, which is a DBT tool, if I can't access my brain because my brain is the size of a pea because I'm having amygdala activation?
I love the way you talk. I love your phrase.
It's like you can't get to your brain.
Well, and I have to say that I know a lot about CBT, about DBT and CBT for that matter. And I've never wanted to do CBT because I thought it's so linear. I mean, it just feels like being in a foreign country and you meet someone and they don't understand you, so you just talk louder, but it doesn't really help.
Yeah.
And yet I know Russ Ramsey does very effective work with
Well, the reason that Russ is so effective is because he makes modifications for ADHD.
exactly,
And I was going to
exactly.
say, those of our colleagues who are in the ADHD field and have done cognitive behavioral therapy for ADHD, including Russ Ramsey, it works because it's adjusted, right?
Exactly.
But so
Exactly.
many people will be like, oh, I don't need to make adjustments. I can just help this person. And it's like, no, you do need to make adjustments,
Got
right?
it. I got it.
And also, I mean, and I say this with deep respect, but a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy is a form of coaching, right? So if you look at like
Is
Mary
it?
Solano's
Absolutely.
group CBT book, which I have right in front of me,
Yeah.
it's like get a watch, get a planner, and that's not bad. They're doing it in group context, they're doing it with some thought, testing and stuff. But
Yeah.
it is a form of coaching, which again, not bad, but it's different from a lot of what other CBT does or is trying to do. So
Okay, well, I just want to mention this.
yeah,
And I've talked to a lot of people who say, I went to a therapist and they didn't get it, so I stopped going.
yeah,
And it's not the therapist, it's not something intentional that they are doing to say, oh my goodness, I'm just going to screw this person up even
no,
more.
no,
But it also adds to our sense of failure.
it does.
And
Yes.
I have to
Yep.
say that I went to a therapist. I was kind of, you know how you kind of interview therapists, like, okay,
Yeah.
we'll
Oh,
go
you
for
should. You absolutely should.
exactly. And I went to the therapist and I thought things were going pretty well. And we got to the end of the trial session, if you will.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm sorry, but you're just too ADHD. I can't work with you. I sobbed all the way home. I mean, it was traumatic for me.
That is traumatic. It's another
I'm
rejection,
rejecting,
right?
I'm rejecting you. I mean, she could have said something a little
She
bit
could
more.
have. She absolutely, and she should have. That was
Yeah.
not okay,
But
right?
you know, the truth is that she may have said something more kind and my brain took it in
It's
as,
possible, but it's
you know,
also possible she said that because sometimes I mean, we're imperfect as humans, but also we don't extend extra or even like basic care to people who we don't understand. Like we don't realize that we need to be just as, if not more kind. And so, yeah, I mean, she may have said that. And again, your brain may have interpreted it that way, but like she definitely should have been much more mindful about how to say that's not going to work. Right. And and again, even just that story right there is one drop in a bucket of millions and millions of stories of people. I hear these stories because I'm what I call an end of the line therapist because I'm private pay. So people
yeah,
have to, no insurance. But
yeah,
by the time people get to me, they've gone through a bunch of therapists and
yes.
they get to me and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the first time anyone has ever seen me, affirmed me, actually understood my brain. And that's why I put in my bio about being passionate about training other therapists, is because
Yes.
I want to be out of a job. I want to work at Costco. Like, I don't want to have to do this, but so few therapists are actually competent in ADHD. I just had an assessment earlier this month, and the woman came to me because she and her therapist had been discussing ADHD because the therapist herself had it.
Yeah.
But as I discussed my psychoeducation pitch of like how the brain works, how it all works, at the end of it, she goes, "Are you accepting clients?" And I was like, "Oh, I thought that you liked your therapist." And she's like, "I do, but she didn't teach me any of this, and she's not on meds. She's not treating her own ADHD.
God. Oh,
And
wow.
not just med, but like she's just like," and I was like, "Oh, okay." And she's like, "I really want to explore holistic treatment, whereas
Yeah.
this person is giving me some tools and stuff that are helping, but isn't actually teaching me the whole package." So it's just, I think other therapists are wonderful people, but we really, really need to do better in terms of ADHD and autistic and neurodivergent care. And I'm actually launching a business called Do Better to train therapists specifically
Congratulations.
because
Oh,
of
that
this issue.
sounds
So,
exciting. So again, you guys, you know why I brought this woman on here. Noelle is just so amazing. So let's go
so
back to the
oh, but
question.
your other question, I didn't answer it because we're ADHD, is so ADHD, EMDR for regular trauma
Yes,
processing,
yes,
but then
yes,
EMDR for ADHD.
yes.
Okay,
That's
so
right.
this is what I'm pioneering. This is what's not evidence-based. This is what I'm bringing to the world.
Yeah.
So I believe that yes, ADHD is able to be improved, not cured, not solved, right? But symptoms can be improved using EMDR. So how this works is that when we have a negative experience, it can often reinforce a negative belief we have about ourselves. So the experience you had with that therapist
Yeah.
is like, I'm rejected,
Yeah.
right? Or I'm too much, right?
Mhm.
Something like that.
Too
So
loud.
too loud, right? So that negative belief is collecting these experiences. So it's like a rope that you use for oyster fishing. It's like, I'm too much, and it fishes the oysters of like all these experiences. So what we do in EMDR is we take that lie out and we say, Linda, you're not too much, but let's process all the experiences that taught you that you were. But then let's put in a positive adaptive belief of, I am beautiful and amazing and wonderful just the way I am. Something that's truthful, but that can be much more affirming to your life. Now, here's the thing, the trick with ADHD and EMDR is that I believe that many of us are actually experiencing negative beliefs related to our symptoms.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a
Say more about
procrastinator.
that. Okay, got
So
it.
I'm a procrastinator.
Mhm.
I'm humanly incapable of time management.
Okay.
I cannot be on time. One of my favorites from a client was, I'm humanly incapable of doing uninteresting tasks,
Okay, I got
right?
it.
So once we believe this about ourselves,
Mhm.
we are now over-identifying with our ADHD symptoms,
Oh,
and they will be worse.
got it.
So if
Reinfor
we can, sorry?
reinforcing.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Right.
So if
Got
you
it.
believe I am a procrastinator, it's going to be no matter how much meds you're on, no matter how much coaching you're doing, no matter what you're doing, no matter your fish oil, your, body doubling, whatever you're doing to support yourself, if you believe you are at the core of your personhood a procrastinator, you're not going to be able to overcome procrastination.
You will be, yeah.
And then you have all these memories that prove the memories are there, but they tell you that they prove that you are that thing. So when we bring EMDR into the mix with ADHD care, what we're saying is that we can undo these negative core beliefs about our symptoms and actually see massive symptom improvement. And I've actually seen that with a lot of clients. We're
Wow.
talking like a 50 to 60% symptom improvement.
Wow, that's
Depression,
amazing.
anxiety, and ADHD symptoms.
Oh my gosh. And so it's not just ADHD. And what you just, a lot of the things you just mentioned go along with ADHD, especially for women.
Yes.
Yeah. And
So a
so,
lot of the work we do specifically with women in EMDR and for ADHD is shame, right? So I'm unworthy, I don't belong. Those big shame pieces, like, Sari Solden and Michelle Frank write about it in their book that I will always advertise for, Radical Guide to Women with ADHD. Everyone needs to read it, any
let's read
woman
this.
out there. But what they get at as well is this underpinning of shame of, you forgot the avocados again, right? You're late for your kids pickup again, so it's going to cost you an extra $50. Like, you don't know how to do your hair and makeup well because you never were taught, because you never had the executive function for it, right? Maybe you're overweight because you eat because you're impulsive, right? And maybe your body also has some sort of illness like PCOS or POTS or something like that, which comes along with our neurodivergence, right?
Mhm.
And so there's this shame, cultural shame, that drives so many of us women, and then that causes anxiety disorders. It causes autoimmune disorders. It causes it causes sleep disorders. These are all actually based in can be based in our internal experience of how we're talking to ourselves, how we're treating ourselves, and what we believe about ourselves.
Okay, so I just want to be really clear here
Yes.
that we're
Yes.
talking about responsibility, not blaming ourselves for this stuff, because it sounds like, okay, well, it's all about me, so therefore I should be able to fix it. But we can't
No.
do it ourselves because it's like a closed circle, right? It just keeps going around and around. It's
Right.
that
And
rumination.
it's that idea of like, I just need to be like, I failed, so I need to be better. And it's like, what did you actually fail is where I would always start.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. Because otherwise it's that closed circuit of like perfectionism, shame, and self-loathing, which is, again, without treated ADHD, that's what we're using to do executive function. We need to
right.
remember that. So I actually get people who come in all the time who did great CBT with their therapist. They don't
Mhm.
hate themselves anymore, but they can't get anything done
That's a
because,
pain in the butt.
and I've had this happen like 6 or 8 times where people come in and they're like, I no longer hate myself, which is great, but
Yes.
I cannot do anything. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you don't have an activated prefrontal cortex, right? And
Exactly.
so but again, that's really though the focus with with women especially, but it's also with men. Like the shame piece of EMDR is huge because EMDR is actually designed to address shame and trauma in that sense. And so when we bring it into the ADHD world, it's a game changer for moving the needle on that.
Oh my gosh. We have to stop, but I
I
know I
know.
want to, and I know that all of you out there don't want to. So please, I'm going to ask you, and maybe on my knees, please come back next year.
Oh,
So we
of course, Linda, always.
yeah, I'm
And
so
next year, my manual should be out, or we should at least have a publishing
close.
date.
Yeah. Oh, I'm thrilled. And just to be clear, the manual was written for professionals to
It
help,
is. Yes.
correct? Okay.
So there will be future books, and you can, well, if you have a therapist, please let them know to go to emdrforadhd.com.
Yeah.
We'll have a sign up sheet that people can get on the list. We'll offer a discount if they do ahead of time, that kind of stuff. So, and I do offer trainings ahead of time and consultation. So if you have a therapist you're interested in working with me, please send them over. But yes, right now it is for EMDR trained therapists. Now, as we go, more and more will come out, and I'm not going to gatekeep, but I want people who are going to therapy for EMDR to be able to get treatment that's going to work for their brains.
I'm really happy to hear that from a personal level, because I started therapy with a new therapist just at the end of last year. And she is EMDR trained. That's one of the reasons I went to her.
Good.
But if we can integrate the ADHD piece, because she's not really well versed in ADHD,
Right.
but
Most therapists aren't.
she's doing a magnificent job anyway. Just
Yeah.
magnificent is how you say that. I think she would be very interested, because she's fairly new, and I think she's really open to hearing more about this. Okay, so we have covered a lot of
So
ground
much. Yes.
So let's pull this together for folks.
Yeah.
What's the important message or messages that you really want people to remember? Because our working memory doesn't remember what you said.
Of course. I've got a few snippets for you. So first thing is that people with ADHD are more likely to experience both chronic and acute trauma.
Got it.
So if you feel like you have experienced trauma, I'm validating that it's probably actually, yes, you did, right? Now, go to a therapist, a trained trauma therapist. There's an organization called EMDRIA. It's the governing organization for, it's EMDRIA for EMDR. So that I'm EMDRIA certified. You want to go to someone who is either part of EMDRIA or has been EMDRIA trained. It's very much like it's a standardized, so we know that people are good, right? That's the key. So you can go to an EMDR therapist and say, hey, I'm realizing I've experienced trauma in my life. I'd like to do EMDR for it. Absolutely great thing. So the second takeaway is that EMDR for ADHD is a specialized therapy treatment for ADHD. The manual for it will be available in 2025. People who have an EMDR therapist, let them know that it's coming down the line. And that also there are new and exciting treatments coming for ADHD, more than just what I'm doing. But like, just keep your eyes out, and that there's hope. There's a lot of hope. And like I said earlier, like I've done over 5,000 sessions, and with EMDR specifically with only neurodivergent clients, and the results are amazing. But there's other people out there doing cool stuff too. So just realize that you're not alone. You're not, broken. You're not a hopeless case. There's a lot of us who care, and there's a lot of us who are passionate about seeing treatment come up that's going to actually work and help us to thrive, right?
Oh my God. And that's every Palooza, I get a little tearful.
Oh, yeah.
And when you said we really care,
you do.
It's hard to find people who really care.
I know.
So thank you. I mean, I care, but just to hear it from someone else is so validating and so reassuring. And the very, very essence of who we are exactly what you said. Magnificent, amazing people.
We are incredible humans.
So
and we deserve to thrive. We don't deserve to be trapped by our negative core beliefs. We don't deserve to be living in shame spirals and anxiety spirals. And there is freedom and there's healing. That's why I use the word healing, is I believe in a healing process. And there's so much hope for women with ADHD. And I just want to get that message out there as much as possible. And what you're doing is a huge part of that. So I'm so thankful.
Thank you, Noelle. We really do have thousands of people, more and more and more. And
this is
we're actually putting stuff on TikTok for the first time. Yay! Okay. I know I have to let this woman go because she has to go do more sessions. 5,001 sessions she will not be. Don't forget, please, I beg you, send this to someone that you know. Probably someone in your family, because they are likely to have ADHD even if they're undiagnosed.
Yes.
So this is, and send it to anyone that you know has experienced trauma as well. Because as I say, we like other ADHD folks, so they may be ADHD as well. So don't forget about the pink ticket party on Saturday, which is another opportunity to be there and share with each other and talk to some of our experts. We don't know exactly who will be there because it depends on their schedule. And of course, you have access for this for 27 hours, and you can buy all of this. This session alone is worth $97, just so you know. All right, you guys. And Noelle, thank you so much for being
Hey,
here.
you're such a, and thank you for doing this. I know how much work the Palooza is. I hope everybody out there realizes how much work you put in. It's so much work, but it's also such a gift to the world. Like, we would be so lost without what you're doing, and we need it. I send people to Palooza every single year, and every time they're like, I just got so much information, and I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, let's just keep moving the needle on ADHD because we need it.
Yahoo! Oh, by the way, don't forget this necklace, the little one that kind of looks like feathers.
Beautiful.
Necklace that goes with Noelle. You match them up and you have a chance to be in the lottery to win a free set of the recordings. So just, continue to do. I used to give people my necklaces and then they were like, no, I really want the recording. So we just give you the recordings.
I love it.
Exactly. All right, everyone. We'll see you next time. Mwah. Take care. Bye, Noelle.
Thank you so much.
What a great session, eh? And if we didn't completely figure out everything about women's ADHD, at least we got another piece of the puzzle. Thanks to our fabulous experts who made every day this week a Palooza Day and brought us their own wisdom and insight to women's ADHD in 24. As usual, the ADHD Women's Palooza is brought to you by Linda Rogley and the AD Diva Network for ADHD Women 40 and better at adddiva.net. Now, it's your turn. Get those ADHD neurotransmitters fired up and ready to go. Try out some of the things you've heard about this week. You might discover a piece of your own ADHD puzzle. Thanks for joining me this year, and mark your calendar for the 2025 ADHD Women's Palooza.